The focus of this research is to conduct appropriate qualitative research and analysis to understand ways in which Australian Pork Limited, APL, can leverage its position across key consumer groups to increase the consumption of pork relative in lieu of other competing meat groups. While seeing strong results against each metric's KPIs, building consumer demand with a focus on consumer preference groups for pork remain the crux of APL's marketing strategy. APL have expressed a vested interest in accelerating the conversion of busy beef preferers, BBPs, and guaranteed easies, GEs, to pork lovers by 3 times the current rate within over the next 3 years to financial year 18. Our management decision problem looks at how APL can increase the rates of conversion across specific consumer groups to drive growth in the consumption of pork relative to competing meat groups. Furthering from this, our marketing research problem looks at ways to identify pork's perceived strengths and weaknesses relative to other meats, and in doing so, find ways to stimulate the targeted consumer groups to increase their frequency of pork consumption and favourable pork experiences through strategic marketing channels. To determine our ROs, we began by breaking down our MRP. Firstly, we need to identify pork's strengths and weaknesses in the eyes of consumers, which leads to research objective 1. Where we aim to examine how the target segments perceive pork relative to other meats by attempting to discover the relative attitudes to the various aspects of pork shown here. The second part of our MRP is to deal with how we stimulate increased pork consumption. As a result, RO2 aims to evaluate what stimuli would motivate the target segments to try a new pork meal or an old one again. We then realised we need to know how to apply these stimuli. As a result, we decided to investigate which communication channels would be most effective in aiding the conversion of target segments. This knowledge would not be useful, however, if we did not know when to apply the stimuli discovered in RO2, and so RO4 was developed, in order to determine the point at which purchasing decisions are made, allowing us to identify which point in the shopping process buyers will be most receptive. Our MRP also mentions favourable pork experiences, which is important, as even if we can stimulate our target segments to try pork more frequently, if we cannot ensure favourable pork experiences when they do, then it will be difficult to establish loyal and reliable consumption. As such, RO5 was developed to identify ways in which home eating quality can be increased. Our research design took the direction of a more deductive approach. 2 methods of qualitative fieldwork were selected to identify pork's perceived strengths and weaknesses relative to other meats, and in doing so, finds ways to stimulate the target consumer groups to increase their frequency of pork consumption and favourable pork experiences. Due to the exploratory and descriptive nature of our study, our selected methods were in-depth interviews and focus groups. This allowed us to collect data which was insightful, readily obtainable, and flexible in regards to how conversations evolved from initial questions. Screening surveys were used to find participants that fall within busy beef preferers and guaranteed easy segments. Questions in surveys were tailored to quickly sort respondents into 3 categories: GEs, BBPs, and others. Those that fell within GE and BBP groups were then asked to participate in interviews or focus groups, with interviews being conducted on the spot where possible, or otherwise details were taken in order to arrange later dates to perform them. Respondents were headhunted from 3 separate locations around Sydney, the North Shore, Eastern Suburbs and Inner West, in order to best achieve a range of respondents and therefore varied samples. Some respondents were also chosen from friends and family who completed the screening survey and fell within the required target markets. Together, these 2 sampling methods yielded a total sample size of 48. Our first research method was conducting 30 individual interviews. From this, 17 were males between the age of 25 to 40, and 13 were females between the age of 30 to 38. The interviews were generally 15 to 20 minutes in length, and as a result of this, the basis of our findings allowed it to be more interpersonal. We gained an emotional connection with our respondents, and as a result of the individuality, got an unbiased response. We also conducted 4 focus groups, 1 of 5 BBPs, 1 of 5 GEs, and 2 of 4, both mixed BBPs and GEs. They were approximately 1 hour in length and facilitated by 2 moderators. The basis of these findings allowed for the snowball effect of a collaborative research method.
For BBPs, preferences were more abstract in nature. Meat consumption was not restricted by price constraints, but rather motivated by a desire for a sensory experience. Taste was the most important and frequently documented determinant amongst respondents of this target market, informing preferences for one meat group over another. Facial animation during questions concerning taste highlighted the emotional appeal of this aspect. Pork was no exception to this. On the most part, respondents from this segment confirmed undesirable taste associations with pork. This absence of desirability is heavily weighted on a limited understanding when it came to diversifying flavour bases and how to best extract the full taste potential when cooking with pork in a time-efficient manner. GEs, on the other hand, exhibited a more practical grounding in preference formation. Pork is perceived as expensive with little merit to justify this premium pricing. Beyond price, the second largest determinant found in forming perception of pork within this segment was the ability to mass cook, but to do so with ease and little disruption to allocated cooking time and with cooking processes they are familiar with, all of which they expressed a significant degree of uncertainty around when it came to pork. It is important to note that both consumer groups are relatively uneducated on the health benefits of pork, with some respondents visibly surprised on the merits of protein and fat content. Following discussion in focus groups confirmed that health was a major consideration point across segments. BBPs are not price conscious, and thus the role of pricing is minor in motivating them to try a new pork meal or an old one again. Instead, stimuli related to flavour and usage presented themselves as much more effective sources of motivation. Although respondents deemed themselves to possess relatively sophisticated cooking skills, further direction to enhance flavour potential is required. BBPs are open to receiving recipes and suggestions about cooking through online, friends, or influencers. Alternatively, GEs are more likely to buy pork if they understood the positioning of it and perceptions of price were transformed. However, respondents demonstrated a lack of tolerance for cooking with pork as they are not confident. Conversely, they would be willing to try pork products if they were easy to follow recipes that could satisfy their families, or how to better apply cooking methods they were already familiar with. GEs are unlikely to be affected by influencers due to their inexperience. However, chefs who promote easy family-style recipes may be ideal.
Guaranteed Easies were found to have an extremely strong social media presence, with most spending a large amount of time on Facebook and to a lesser extent other social networking sites. Many also had significant exposure to television, not necessarily watching much directly, but many participants stated that it was often on in the background during evenings. GEs also usually access social media from their smartphones, and relied on them as personal computers, using desktops, laptops, and other technologies in relatively small proportions. BCB preferers also use Facebook heavily, but their access points often differed, with a high proportion saying that they regularly use laptops and desktops for access, as well as smartphones. Most watch very little television, except via online streaming services like Netflix. Some read newspapers regularly, but often online. Guaranteed Easies nearly always shopped with a shopping list, although most reported that they often varied from it, taking extra items or foregoing items on the list, mainly depending on price. They also often shopped with children or a spouse, and their companions' opinions often played a large part in what was bought. They primarily purchased their produce from supermarkets, however this was based on convenience, and those that had conveniently located local butchers often shopped there instead, citing a perception of higher quality or a want to support local businesses. BCB preferers, on the other hand, were found to mostly shop by themselves, without a list, usually dropping by a supermarket on the way home from work. They tended to make their choices based on what they felt like at the time in terms of taste, whilst also giving priority to what they could cook quickly and easily. We found that Guaranteed Easies often expressed that if given a simple recipe that they could easily scale to feed their larger families, they would be more likely to try it. Their want to finish cooking as fast as possible meant that many had admitted to attempting to take shortcuts when faced with cooking larger meals, and this had sometimes led to failures. It was also discovered that they would happily use ingredients that were pre-prepared or partially pre-prepared, like marinated products, if they knew taste wouldn't be compromised, as any simplifications that would speed up preparation were welcomed. BCB prefers that they didn't often use recipes when cooking, or did not strictly follow them when they did. They usually didn't have much time for cooking, although some respondents expressed that they tended to spend more time cooking on the weekends, and would even look for and try new recipes at such times.
Both BBPs and GEs differ in their primary aspects that lead to their respective preference formation. Therefore, there is difficulty for APL in creating one uniform marketing campaign to target and convert both segments. This difficulty is exacerbated by limited resources to be allocated towards marketing communications. The preferences of BPs in relation to the meat consumption is heavily weighted on abstract and subjective mediums such as taste, which are inherently more experiential in nature and sensory driven. Preferences are thus more malleable for this segment, which although makes them more susceptible to the idea of trying pork, does not create a consumption pattern conducive to loyalty. As a result of these hedonistic motivations, BBPs are susceptible to switching preferred meats at any given time. This is not ideal for APL in attempting to build growing demand for Australian pork producers through a stable consumer base. The preferences of GEs, on the other hand, were grounded in practicality and centered around price and provision for bulk cooking. By educating GEs on the merits of pork in relation to these determinants of meat preferences through strategic marketing communications, APL would be appealing to rationality. Rationality promotes stability in purchasing behaviour and establishes provisions for habitual loyalty. Therefore, GEs, in our opinion, are the more viable group to target through strategic communication channels, as they present themselves as the most susceptible to conversion and as having the greater propensity to modify purchasing behaviour in the long term. APL should promote pork's desirable attributes in order to inform consumers of its nutritional value and change their perception of pork as a less healthy and somewhat unknown meat product. This should be achieved through a marketing mix that involves television commercials and a strong social media presence associating words such as quick, easy, and healthy with pork in the minds of consumers. In-store specials and promotional materials should be used to grab attention at the point of sale, taking advantage of consumers' price-conscious natures to stimulate them to buy pork as they are making their purchasing decisions. Partially pre-prepared products should be provided and used in easily accessible recipes available in-store, on packaging, and on social media. These products will facilitate a reduction in cooking times, increase convenience, and therefore decrease the chance of cooking failures, which will in turn increase overall home eating quality amongst these less experienced cooks. This should in turn lead to the development of habitual pork purchasing behaviours, so that Guaranteed Easies greatly increase their frequency of pork consumption as it becomes an easy, tasty product that can be regularly included in a variety of meals.